Hi, welcome to Comic Talk.
I'm Drew.
And I'm Josh. That was quick on the trigger, my friend.
Gotcha.
This is our TV tie-ins episode for Jessica Jones, a.k.a. Alias. This is the Netflix series that came out just a couple weeks ago. It's all there. You've probably watched it already. And we're thinking you probably now want to read more.
I would agree.
Yeah. This series is by Brian Michael Bendis and is it Eric Grados? Let me look and see. No, it's Michael Gatos.
There we go.
This series came out in the mid-2000s, and really, this is a kind of a gimme on TV tie-ins because this is basically what the show is based on.
Yeah.
This Brian Michael Bendis run.
He's even the executive producer, I think, on the show.
Right.
So.
The interesting thing here, though, is we're going to talk about issues 1 through 9. Also, issue number 10. 1 through 9 is the first trade, and issue number 10 is just a one-shot issue. And this, although there are some things that happen in the show that they pulled from this and threw in there, really, most of the stuff that happens in the show is volume 3, I believe, of this series. It's like the last run, I think, like 20 through 28, or 19, somewhere in there. So if you're wanting more Jessica Jones and not just another version of what you've already watched, this is perfect for that because these are different stories, these are different mysteries, and different problems that she's dealing with. First of all, what are some things that are in here, though, that they will recognize if they read this?
Luke Cage. The fact that she's a private investigator, obviously. The recurring broken door, I think,
right.
is a theme very early on.
Mm-hmm. The first scene in the show is more or less the first scene in the first issue. Mm-hmm. More or less. It's pretty much the same. There's even some shot-for-shot.
Yeah, somebody goes through it.
Right. But broadly speaking, these are different stories. Obviously, because we start at issue 1, we have to introduce Luke Cage in this series. And so really the introduction of Luke Cage is very similar to what we get in the show, even down to a similar setup for their sex scene that they have. Like it's very similar how it all goes down. They sit and chat about their powers. They end up together in this drunken, awkward situation together. There's a few other scenes, like the scene we were talking about, the one early on when she's framed and she's being interrogated
and stuff.
We get a very similar scene there. They definitely lifted some of that straight from this early run and used it in the show because it's just great. It sets up her character really well, so they pulled that out and used it.
How do you feel about the tone of the comic versus the show?
Okay, first of all, the comic was the very first Max imprint for Marvel. Max was Marvel's response to Vertigo. Vertigo did really well for a long time. Like Marvel tried some other things, different imprint kind of stuff, but Max was kind of like their Vertigo, but it's Marvel, so let's take it a step further. And so there's lots of cursing and sex and drugs and rape, and they redid Punisher with Max. They redid Deadpool. They've done a bunch of different characters, but Brian Michael Bendis coming in and doing Jessica Jones or Alias as it's called on this. They couldn't call the show on Netflix Alias because of the Jennifer Garner show from like the 90s. But him coming in on this as the very first one and doing like a brand new story with a minor character, I think is one of the more interesting things they did. But because of that, he's very intentionally in some places dark and throws in extra F-bombs.
Sure.
And, shows a little more gratuitous sex. And so in a way that's very similar to the tone of the show because Netflix is doing kind of the same thing. This is Marvel's one of their early chances. They did it with Daredevil, now they're doing it with this, to really do a dirty, gritty, sexy kind of show.
Because they want to keep their cinematic universe pretty light, so they're saying, okay, well, we can do this Netflix thing, and that's where we can have the more adults thing.
Right, and I think Netflix actually kind of feels like the Max imprint of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But there's also an aspect, I thought, of the comic where things feel maybe more dumpy is that a...
In the comic?
Yeah, like an explanation that makes sense. Maybe a little...
Like in what way?
Or frumpier. Like, it's partially Ritter's take on the character on the show, I think, is a little bit more spunky rather than just burnt out. Like, I feel like she's a little more burnt out in the comic and a little spunkier on the show.
I think she's by far more sympathetic in the comic, actually.
Well, I agree, actually.
Yeah, in the show, like, there's a lot of times, like, even when you have, like, the deepest sympathy for her, you just stop liking the character for a while, you know, especially by the time you get to the end of the season, you know, through 13 episodes of that. In here, yeah, she's just really an underdog. I mean, she is kind of like a bitch, but it's always warranted, you know, like if somebody invades her personal space in some way or another, then yeah, I mean, it's always called for. Whereas in the show, she's just kind of generally a bitch to everybody.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of what I mean, like, in the show, spunky or sparky, like, she's just more bitchy for bitchy's sake, whereas in the comic, you feel like she's just really been handed a really brutal hand, and, you know, she seems more like a nice, likable person who's just fucking fed up with everything, you know?
Yeah. And I have to attribute a little bit of that, too, and it's weird to bring this up with Bendis, but this is probably the most narrative box action I've seen in a Bendis comic.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think it goes a long way towards making more sympathetic because, you know, you get to, like, hear the things in her head and whatnot, whereas with the show, you know, that's ironically the more classic Bendis take of just using dialogue to tell the story, and yeah, she comes off a little bit more cold without that sort of extra narration.
That's a great point. I'm sure that's the difference, now that you mention it, is that in the comic we get to hear her side of why she's being the way she's being. When she does something shitty, then right after that we get a narrative box of, like, here's how I feel and why I said that and why I'm upset about this. So I think you're right. That is what makes her more sympathetic in the comics. Now, artistically, how do you feel about the comic?
I think the highlight would be the paneling and the layout and stuff. The actual drawing, it's cool. It's got its own kind of style. It reminds me of Image a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. And I think for a TV tie-in episode like we're doing, I think this is a great one because the paneling layout is very easy to follow.
It is.
Like, he does a really great job of making the comic easy to understand as you're reading through it. So if
even when he has, like, some very creative layouts and stuff, I mean, they're always very sequential. Like, it may be laid out kind of weird, but if you just go left to right, you know, top to bottom, like, it all works out.
Right. You don't have to try to figure out, like, the inlays and, like, which one do I go to now based on, like, where everybody's looking. And
for sure.
Yeah, it's really well laid out. So for somebody who's primarily a show watcher into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but maybe you just really like Jessica Jones and, you know, you're wanting to jump into something and you think this is a good place, we agree, I think, right? This is a really good place to jump in and get some comics, especially if this is kind of the part of the Marvel Universe that you're really liking, this grittier, you know, more adult version of Marvel. That's exactly what we get here. Again, that's what this imprint was for. Is let's make adult stuff for adults, not hold bars. No, not bar holds, right?
No holds barred.
Right. Yeah. But if it's no holds barred, it means that you're not barring holds, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So let's not bar any holds. That's good.
So,
I'm gonna add that to my vernacular.
Barring any further holds. So the actual stories we get in here, as we mentioned, are quite a bit different. So let's talk about the first one. So in the first one, she's kind of framed for murder and whatnot, and she ends up with this tape of the secret identity of
wait. Let's just do something real quick.
Okay.
We're probably going to spoil some things here.
Yeah.
So from this moment on, if you have not read this, you might want to... Ooh. God, I hate it. You might want to stop watching our video, man.
Yeah.
Dang it.
Stop.
Go read books. Come back later. Okay, so we're going to spoil now. So
cool.
It's not just somebody. Whose stuff does she read? You've been warned.
Captain America.
Right.
Finds Captain America's secret identity.
Right. Now, what a great choice of characters. Like, I think this was...
It's very intentional.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's a great decision to go with Captain America because he's, you know, the blue Boy Scout. He's the Superman of Marvel. Everybody thinks he's great.
Right.
And so we immediately, in a Max book, I love this, that, you know, the very first storyline in a Max title, we get Captain America, the
pulls
untouchable.
up the squeaky clean.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and so we get to see how somebody like Jessica Jones in her situation deals with this very squeaky clean, or at least somebody who appears to the public to be squeaky clean, like what her response to that is.
Yeah, and I was kind of interested that she, she seemed to like the guy. I expected quite the opposite thing, where she was like, yeah, I always thought you were kind of a tool, but I didn't want to do this to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but she does genuinely seem to admire him.
Yeah.
Which... I think that says a lot about Bendis as a writer and how he feels about the Marvel Universe. And the care that he takes in here not to just trample all over it to make a dirty Max comic. Because, you know, one of the main things about Captain America is supposedly if you spend any time with him, you like him because he's just that kind of guy. You know, he's the kind of guy that no matter how badly you want to think he's just a douchey bro... Like, he's just super nice and helpful and wants to be a good dude. And she has spent a little bit of time with him in the past. So, of course, even though she's bitchy, like, she can't help but like him. Which, again, I like that about Bendis and the way he approaches this.
It's almost like Grant Morrison's relationship with Superman. Mm-hmm. Like, as much time as he can spend exploiting this whole, like, okay, this is really weird that it's a fucking alien, you know, that we're entrusting to be the deciding factor of what is and is not okay. But then, you know, he writes All-Star where he's like, no, this is why we love Superman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's... it's a very intentional choice, though, to bring that character into this Max context early on. And I think it was the right choice because it really does a good job of putting you in that predicament with her. You know, especially if you're a Marvel reader. I know you're not much of a Captain America reader, but it's an easy way for a Marvel reader to get pulled down into that pretty quickly. And if you're somebody who's watched the films, which if you're watching this and you like Jessica Jones and all that, it's a good chance you probably have. You probably feel similar because I think they do a good job of making Captain America pretty damn likable in the movies, you know. So you get kind of that same feel. You know going in now that, you know, how Captain America is. So I think it's interesting now in retrospect as we recommend this here that even somebody who's just read it already has that connection now as they read this. But that story overall, how did you feel about how that progressed?
I was pretty impressed with it, actually. They give it a good amount of time. I think this is the first 6 issues or something, is a story arc. And just really went through, like, all the little details, you know, like, every possibility. Like, the scenes with her sitting there going through the possible scenarios in her head now that she had this tape in her hands were just fantastic. It's phenomenal. I mean, you don't get to see... And again, it's like Bendis starts to use the narrative boxes and then just, like, blows everything else out of the water. Like, why doesn't he do that more often?
The interesting thing about his narrative boxes, though, is that they're still written in, like, Bendis speak.
Yeah, it's like a fourth wall kind of narrative box.
Right, where she's... the narrative reads as you would expect the character to speak in natural language.
Yeah, it's like recanting the experiences.
Right. You know, in his...
autobiography over the top of the story that you're reading.
Right. Well, in his signature dialogue style is that style where people stumble over their words and you get uhs and ums and repeated sentences. People will say the same thing twice in different ways. The way naturally people will speak to one another. You know, but he gets a lot of crap because people say, oh, he's just padding out his conversation. You know, this conversation didn't go anywhere. It was 3 pages and all we got was like one little piece of information. Like, you know, Mark Waid would have made that one panel, you know, and it just would have been done and you move on. But Bendis will make that like a third of the issue, somebody just trying to spit out a conversation to the other person.
Because that's the way it happens in life.
Well, it does make it feel more real, and I think for something...
Especially in those situations, like stressful situations, and, you know, it's kind of absurd to think that people are just... absolutely composed the entire time and speaking the way that you speak in your head on the way to the thing that they were probably about to do.
Right.
That's not how it works.
Right, yeah. But I think that this is one of those examples where it's perfect for that because it fits her character so well because she's not sure of herself. She's often second guessing her thoughts and her ideas and how she should go about things. Or, she's not the paragon of perfection that we see with a lot of other characters, which is also a very strong point of the series. And in these first couple of stories, like, she makes some really stupid mistakes. She does a lot of cool shit, but, she makes a lot of stupid screw-ups that really catapult the story forward.
She's an underdog, for sure.
Right.
I was thinking about it, and I don't know if I would characterize her as an anti-hero in the comic, though I would in the show. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I agree. In the show, she definitely comes off as an anti-hero. In the comic, she's more of an everyman, I think would be the way to put it. And she's
I
also...
I think that's really what he was going for. And she even talks about how her powers, it's cool, but it's not spectacular or anything.
Right.
She's really strong, which on the grand scale of Marvel powers is...
Yeah, it's okay. But that's also an interesting thing about this series is to have, I guess it would be an every woman character. We don't see that very often. That's hard to pull off and not feel pandering, I suppose, especially from a male writer. It's very easy for a male writer to want to make the women very powerful, to go the Joss Whedon route, which I love Joss Whedon, but his tendency, being a male writing powerful women or lead women, is just to make them incredibly amazing. Mm-hmm. But Bendis takes a different route here, and as a man writes a very flawed woman, a woman with a lot of problems and that makes a lot of mistakes. So what do you think of that? Do you think there's any chance for this to be seen from a gender perspective of being a problem of a man writing this character in this way?
I mean, as a woman, I can't really say. But
well, your hair's longer than mine.
I mean, again, as a white male, I can say that I didn't feel conflicted reading it. Right. But no, because I think she's a pretty likable character overall, and I think it's probably kind of refreshing. I mean, because who you got other than that, like Wonder Woman and shit.
Right.
Know?
And I think it also, though, it carries over into the art, too, because we see her, when she's drawn in this comic, the whole time she's in puffy jackets and, jeans and loose T-shirts and scarves and hats. And she's not... But yet, at the same time, there's these very illicit, sexual scenes with her and Luke. And but it seems to be put into context, I think. Anytime we get something very adult-themed, the context seems to be there to make it appropriate. But again, we're two white males, so it's hard to say.
Yeah. But she does wear, actual clothes that fit, so it's cool.
Yeah, street clothes.
Yeah.
Which, in the show, I think is borderline sometimes, watching it.
Yeah, sometimes.
I felt like that was one place where they strayed a bit from the comic is in, her fashion sense. It seemed like in the comic it feels kind of like she's at a point where she was Jewel and worried about how she looked, and at this point she's almost anti that. She just wants to
put
hide.
On clothes, fucking whatever.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of the clothes seem like they're hiding her form, and etc., which I thought added a lot to the character, and I missed with the show. But I guess that's neither here nor there. We're kind of straying. So the first story had that Captain America thing. We also had the introduction of Luke Cage, which, as we discussed previously, a lot of that was taken and used for the show.
Yeah, I mean, not the whole bit about his wife and whatnot. I mean, there's none of that.
Right.
Certainly, to some degree, the nature of their relationship in both.
Well, and just a lot of the feel of their early conversations and discussions and how they came to be together.
Sure.
One thing from the show that I really wanted to see and didn't get to see is when she asks him in the comic about how do you just parade around as Luke Cage and not worry constantly. And he had that great line about being the baddest nigga that ever lived.
Yeah.
You know, I really wanted to see that in the show because that's such a great Luke Cage kind of line, you know? Like,
Yeah.
he's just got that bravado, and I was sad not to see that, but...
All in all, I would say it's a pretty similar character.
Yeah, very similar. Yeah, I think they did a great job of translating that to the screen.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention casting. Where did they find that guy? I've never seen him before in anything, but he is completely believable Luke Cage.
Yeah, he's a great Luke Cage.
Looks the part.
Yeah, he's fantastic. I love him. Yeah. So we get a pretty cool wrap-up of the Captain America story. She even, like, meets him and talks to him for a bit, right?
Fangirls out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's cool.
Mm-hmm. We also, through that, we slowly get the introduction of Carol Danvers, which in the show, Carol seems to be replaced with Trish. Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts there between the two?
I mean, Trish has a more active role than, what's her name? You just said it. Carol. Yeah, see, I already forgot it.
Right.
Like, she's kind of there in a couple places and mentioned in a couple more, and that's about it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting either way. I do like the idea of her having like a superhero friend. I think that's clever and like somebody who's much better at it than she ever was. Because Carol Danvers is Miss Marvel and then became Captain Marvel. And,
no, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, she's super badass. You know,
okay.
She's like the premier like Wonder Woman of the Marvel universe. So it's kind of cool that she has this relationship with somebody else who's very successful and she's very
prominent.
She's very not and
intentionally not prominent.
Right. So I imagine that those conversations, like knowing that, probably would have made that a lot more interesting for you, I suppose.
Probably. I mean, I assume she was just like worked at the Avengers place or something.
Right. Yeah, no, she's big kahuna. Tony Stark level, kind of person.
Oh, okay, cool.
So after that, we get this Rick Jones story.
Rick Jones.
This was a crazy story.
It was so weird. And even when it resolved, like it kind of resolves.
I love that it doesn't resolve, really. I mean, it does. Like, the resolution is like, whoops. Like, but it's so fitting, I think, for this character in this run.
Sometimes you just get sent out on weird shit, and, like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, like, there's just nothing, like, it just doesn't work out,
Yeah.
And it's not like she fails. Like, she does her best to, like...
I mean, she succeeds, technically.
Yeah.
I mean, she found both versions of the guy, and...
Yeah.
I
really liked it. I don't know how much there is to really say about it. It was just a weird little story that... It's just so different from what you would expect, and as it progresses through like the 3 issues that we read, it just gets stranger and stranger as it goes.
It's got some good bits of dialogue in it, though.
It certainly does, yeah.
Especially her talk with the psychologist at the end. Okay, yeah, I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I did as well. That was really great. Finally, issue number 10.
The final issue.
The final issue that we're talking about here today. I just wanted to do this one on top of the first trade that you can get on Amazon for like $18 for issue 1 through number 1 through number 9. Simply because I thought it was a great issue, and since we're already doing 1 through 9, let's talk about 10 as well. So
yeah. The artwork's a lot different in it.
It's very different, and also the way the dialogue works is really different and interesting, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much just like a script.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
every page
disassociated.
Is like yeah. Every page is like a 2-page spread, basically, and then the dialogue with the person speaking is just kind of interspersed throughout.
Right. It's like this weird impressionistic art drawn over the Brian Michael Bendis script. As if to say, the artist is trying to say, like, this script is so strong, it tells the story so well that I don't... Like, it would be a disservice to try to show it panel by panel. Like, you'd really be pulling the reader out of the script by breaking it up into panels and showing her at the kitchen and then ladling the soup. Like, what are you going to do with it? Like, those would be boring panels anyway. Right. So why even do it? Let's just give an impression.
For the whole, like, this whole bit of dialogue.
Right. Yeah, and the story's really clever. I really got a good laugh out of it.
He writes a good Jameson.
Yeah,
He writes a great Jameson.
Yeah, Jameson is great. I'd love to.
You just hate him instantly.
I'd love to read like Brian Michael Bendis, J. Jonah Jameson book. You know, J. Jonah Jameson #1. I would totally read that book.
As the protagonist?
Yeah, he's just the lead protagonist. It's just him running the paper. Like, and that's it. And like
ranting and ordering people around and
right, and like
stressed out.
People come in with different shit that's going on in other books, and he has to like tell them yes or no and why. Like, that's not a good story. That is, it'd be great. I would love it. But so anyhow, we get this whole thing, and it's really just her screwing him over and getting paid for it. There's not so much to say really about.
It's really clever.
Yeah, it's just clever. It's a good little one-shot story. It's funny. And the script is just really good, So that's that.
Yeah.
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 Is that it?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, like we said, that's it. Oh, yeah, other things. Like, subscribe.
Yeah. Wednesday and then a week from today as well.
Yeah, we have things on both of those days.
Yeah.
Yeah, Wednesday we'll do our weekly pull list review. That's where we
Review
go
pull
back,
list.
we look at our pull list, we read them, we tell you what we think. And then next week, are we doing our Talking Comics? Comic Talk Talks Comics?
Yeah. Yeah, we are.
All right, we have our very first episode of a new series we're doing. It's Comic Talk Talks Comics.
As opposed to what we usually do.
Right, which is discuss issues, right?
Review pictorial media.
Sequential art.
Yeah.
Yeah. What this series will be is it'll be us talking about the industry as a whole, larger ideas, how we feel about different things. For example, on Monday, we will be talking about crossover and event titles, how we feel about them, where we think they're going, the future, the past, the present, anti-present.
The future of the past.
The future, the present of the future.
The past of the future.
That's now,
when the past has occurred in the future.
So that kind of stuff. Yeah. So that'll be next Monday. So
wizards and shit.
Check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely
There's
wizards
gonna be
involved.
wizards.
Yeah. At least, plural too, at least 2. Maybe more.
Yeah.
All right, go away.